Hello and welcome to another episode of a podcast. Today I'm joined by Tom, a political graduate currently studying a master's, and also one of my flatmates in my first year. Tom, thanks for coming on tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
How does it feel to have finished your grad and to be coming towards the end of your master's?
It's a weird experience now. I think, where does the time go? It only really feels like yesterday I met you for the first time in kind of Bodiam and stuff. And then, fast forward 4 years and a delayed graduation, it's all kind of come to an end. So sure, the big challenge is the real world, which is the next step. But very bizarre.
Yeah, university flies by. Anyway, with this conversation, I thought we'd just kind of carry on with the natural direction, what we do in the pub, minus one or two other things. I think a good place to start is let's talk about the rise of Boris Johnson. Everyone talks about the rise of Donald Trump all the time, but let's turn the focus onto Boris. How did he get to the position where he's at now?
So I think Boris is a really interesting one. I'd say neither of my parents are particularly politically engaged, but they would both know who Boris is, and they would have for a long time. Obviously, he kind of came onto the scene as a journalist, beginning as an EU correspondent, and then obviously went to move on to The Spectator. So I suppose he kind of paid somewhat of a career in that sense. Mm-hmm. He was lucky, he was funny, he was always a little bit different to kind of the atypical politician. So obviously he kind of got his appearances and his real face out there on TV, kind of doing the "Have I Got News for You," as well as his news articles, which for the most part would be quite outrageous and would be in, very true Boris style with that kind of joke or with that kind of like outrageous line or something like that. So yeah. I think his kind of notoriety almost goes beyond politics and beyond what's kind of considered to be, interesting. In Boris himself is more interesting than politics to the everyday person.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he definitely has that entertainment factor, just like Trump. When people say Boris is like more presidential, well, what do they mean when they say he's more presidential? What's the difference between like a president style versus prime minister?
A clear-cut answer I can give you is if you were to look at like the 2019 election. And I think typically in the parliamentary system, you're voting for your party and you're voting for your manifesto, which is spread across, all of these regions of healthcare, security. But for Boris in 2019, it was a contest very much surrounded by him, with his face at the forefront. And they were really utilizing that brand Boris. And it was done so on his one big policy. So obviously Trump kind of fueled on the drain the swamp, and he had kind of big stances on building the wall and things like that, whereas Boris was get Brexit done. And I think as when you kind of strip away all of the stuff which is very typical of an election for it to be, I'm the best Conservative Party candidate. And when you strip that bare to, you're going to put that tick in the box for me. I think that's far more presidential. I mean, obviously on the ballot in America, it would say, Trump or Clinton or Biden or Trump. So it is difficult. It's different, in the constitutional sense over here. But I think in terms of kind of how the media and how campaigning can come together, that's a perfect recipe for a presidential style leader.
Yeah. What ways would you say he's unconventional? Because on the one hand, people say he just has a very different style, right? Because despite coming from an Oxford background, Eton, he doesn't necessarily live up to that typical conservative image that we all have in our heads. How would you think he's changed that?
I think he's very clever in the way he does it. And I know some people say, you're a genius when you realize Boris is the clown himself. And he's the one that, before he goes out, he'll ruffle up his hair or loosen his tie and things like that. And look, whether or not that's strictly true, there is no denying that he is a product of a character. And like I said, I think that's really what kind of gave him the appeal beyond the standard voter base. But he knows what he's doing. That he released, not many people know this, but in 2004, he released a book called 72 Virgins. And it was about an MP who was a bicycle riding MP, no less. And he was embroiled in an affair campaign. But then he saved kind of his career and he saved the day by ousting a terrorist plot. And if you consider that's something written by Boris Johnson about this kind of character, this lurky figure within Parliament who's embroiled in scandals and all of these kind of things floating around. But yet, if he can, miraculously get away out of it with his personality and with his charisma, it's almost like I say, that brand is really so not atypical of a standard politician. And I think as well, when he kind of uses his humor to his advantage, I think London 2012 was a perfect example of that. Obviously, we all know the meme of him with the flags and the zip wire and stuff. But I think if you look at some of the speeches and then some of the campaigning he done as mayor of London during that time, he hits the nail on the head. He uses a common vernacular that people are, familiar with. He will always make the pun, and I think he's kind of got that real true British spirit about him when he's at his best.
Yeah. Do you think moving forward, all leaders in British politics, they have to almost display that charisma, almost like how Trump did, how Boris has done? It's been a shift. Like they don't really care about the competencies. It's more about the personality. Do you think that's a permanent shift, or do you think that's just like this populist shift that's happened in the last couple of years?
I think we're definitely on a populist shift globally. I think we can see that in kind of the discourse, and I think we can see that in the data, particularly across kind of Eastern Europe and obviously America in kind of the past decade or so. I think in terms of understanding how that's utilized, I think it's just really much a case of you do land your voter base when you get on board with that. And I think that is very short-lived. And I think in the end, people are bored of voting off of emotion and voting off of values, and they kind of do just want a bit of competency. It's almost as if, I think if you look at the prime ministers in this country, it normally goes, a big leader who runs a campaign off of values, kind of followed by someone who's a bit of a wet flannel and a bit of a wet fish, and will almost just settle the dust. Yeah. And I think we can probably expect to see that following on from Boris. I mean, I don't think neither Rishi or Liz Truss are the most kind of personable people in politics, or at least not to Boris Johnson's extent. But I do think there is an opportunity for personality to survive, but I don't think it'll be in the immediate future. I think in kind of the next 5 years or so, it will be about competency, and it will just be about kind of settling the dust. Yeah.
On that point of competency, let's talk a bit about the government the last couple of years. Are they as competent? Are they as bad as what the media has painted them out to be? Or is it a question of perspectives?
I think it's completely the latter. I think it is a position, where does your perspective lie on it? I wouldn't be near qualified enough to kind of give a simple yes or no answer to that. I mean, I suppose if you ask kind of any conservative voter, they would bang on about the vaccine rollout. They would bang on about being the fastest growing economy in the G7. Obviously, have things like the Ukraine front now as well. So I think it really would depend who you ask. Obviously, they got Brexit done. Another one kind of bypassing that parliamentary deadlock, which at the time, I think people kind of now look back at, and we understand that it's not the best deal, but I think at the time we were in such a state of politics where a deal needed to be done. Had it not been done, I think we would have just continued to neglect the social services, healthcare, things like that. So I think Boris being the man to come in and do that was very impressive. But there's no denying the last year and a half has been a shambles on all parts, really. I think as soon as you break the real basics of lying and you have an inability to tell the truth in Parliament, your fate's kind of settled at that point.
Yeah, I agree. It brings up an interesting question on collective responsibility, because for the last 3 years, you have all the cabinet ministers publicly backing Boris all the time. But as it's been obvious, there's been quite a few members that haven't really supported it. They've just come out. Do you think that's a problem with collective responsibility? Because you've got these personalities in the cabinet that don't necessarily back the prime minister, but because of their own personal progression, they stay in the job. Do you think that's an issue?
Pluralism is very real in it, and I guess it's not something again that I can really give a concrete answer on until you hope to experience it. But yeah, I can definitely see how you are almost this kind of toy being stretched from one side to another, and then the whole time you're kind of neglecting the two reasons you're there, being your beliefs and being that of your constituency. So I don't really envy anybody, particularly at the cabinet level, for having to come out and put these statements out saying we don't care about Partygate and all of that. I'm certainly not envious of that. I do think that when one kind of premiership ends and one kind of administration ends, you do find there is almost a new batch that appears. So I think even if you look at kind of the cabinet that Johnson's operated with, how that compares to Theresa May's, it's completely different. Obviously, you get your Michael Goves and your Dominic Raab's kind of floating around. But I think what you will find is for a far majority of those cabinet posts, when a new prime minister's in charge, they will be looking for a new kind of engine to be operating with.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that's like a problem with democracy? The problem we have right now is we vote for MPs based on our constituency, But then once they get elected, they have a party whip, they're expected to vote in line. And it creates this tension because your constituency might want one thing, but your party wants the other. Like, how could this, do you think this could be overcome? Because for me, it seems like a pretty big problem.
It's a really difficult one. I think when you kind of start playing onto those arguments, you look at kind of the ones of a whole regime change and a whole system change. And I think there's definitely kind of room for that one day. I mean, we are still working in the exact same systems as we were, you know, kind of in the 1600s and when Parliament was created and stuff. So you could definitely say that there are elements of it, one inside the culture and one inside of the actual kind of foundations of it, which need improving. Whether or not that's something that you can kind of do overnight is really difficult. I think you have to kind of encourage a new generation of politics where people are in the role for the good of the world. And I do hope that, you know, the kind of idea of the old boys club and kind of these old smoke rooms and you're voting for whoever because you've kind of, you've got to, I think those will slowly die out. But that's only on kind of the back of, you know, a new generation coming through with kind of good, honest values, avoiding things like corruption, avoiding kind of, you know, as you say, tactical voting and being a careerist, but just being a high value politician. So I think that'll definitely be welcomed in, but when that'll be, I'm not too sure.
Yeah. On that point, obviously we have here that system of first past the post and that two-party system. Do you think maybe a system like Germany's would be better? Because when you look at the UK and the US, you pretty much only have two parties. I know you can make a case here in the UK for like UKIP, Lib Dems, they've had an impact. But ultimately, in both countries, America, US, you only really have two options. Do you think this is a problem? Because ultimately, if you have polarization like we have now, the two parties just become so extreme. Like, there's people like me, I don't know who the hell I'm going to vote for in the next election. So do you think something like German, like proportional system would be better? Or do you think this is like the best of a bad bunch of what we have?
I think it's really difficult. Again, it's something that has been kind of teased in politics. I know it was a Liberal Democrat manifesto pledge, I think in like 2010 or something. So it's an idea that occasionally does kind of, get played with. Do I think it would work in Britain? I'm not so sure. I'm a bit of a, I kind of like tradition. And I'd say that I kind of agree with the traditional sense of Parliament for the British sense.
Yeah.
But then I can also very much say that I think when you look at the kind of, roundtable parliaments and the roundtable congresses in Europe, I see how they can be more well-functioning. And I think where there's certainly space in the UK for more polite debate and more kind of sophisticated debate. And there's no denying that, every Wednesday at 12 o'clock in the Commons, that can be anything but that. And it's almost just like a row from either side. So I think there's elements of improvements to be made, but whether or not that, means knocking down the House of Parliament and building kind of a new modern chamber and stuff, I'm not so sure. But I think that there's certainly room for a coalition in the future. And that will continue to happen. I think as you look at, as you say, with polarization, I think as these kind of really dividing issues on the left and right continue to occur, and as the idea of being a left-wing person or the idea of being a right-wing person becomes more and more fragmented and more confusing, it will take a party with good branding and with good leadership and with good principles to hopefully make a change. But again, it's something that it's not something that can happen overnight. I mean, Labour, Conservatives, and the Lib Dems, they've been going, for since the dawn of kind of Parliament itself. So it's of no kind of a miracle that you can just pop one of these parties up. But I think if you kind of get the things going, get the tracks in motion, and they've already got the big support of the electorate, I think there's room for it.
Yeah. Right now, the Tories have such a bad image, and I don't think Labour are sparking too much enthusiasm in the electorate. Do you think there's room for like another party? Is there room for like a Liberal Democrat revival?
I bet any political commentator would say yes, there is without a shadow of doubt a room for a new party. And I just think the problem is we can't seem to find one, or there doesn't seem to be that viable option at the moment. I think this is the role the Liberal Democrats really should be playing. And it almost baffles me that, again, you look back at the last 18 months, been pretty shabby on both sides. Yeah. And it's amazed me that this ground hasn't managed to be seized. But I think that, again, kind of comes down to leadership. It comes down to where you put yourself. I think at the moment, we are in such a kind of mixed state where you can't come out and say a policy such as we wish to rejoin the EU, because it won't be that popular for the Liberal Democrats. So they need to try and find this middle ground. but they are really struggling to do it. And I don't think come 2024 they'll do much better either. I think it's the responsibility of the left and any kind of swing voters to rally behind Keir and send the Conservatives a message.
Yeah. Look, we're just coming to the end of university. We've seen it, the hatred for the Tory party. How can the Tories go about changing their image? Because it's coming off the back of a pandemic and everything that's just happened in the last couple of years. Austerity, all the lies with Boris Johnson, etc. How can they go about changing their image and trying to appeal to a younger generation?
It's almost like something David Cameron done in when he first became leader. So when he was in opposition, they ran this campaign called a Hug a Hoodie campaign, and it was an idea, and it's a very out of touch campaign, but it's the idea that they wanted to ditch the nasty Tory party and all of these connotations of the Tory party about being, not very in touch with the people. They just wanted to be rid of. Obviously, Hug a Hoodie is a terrible idea for a campaign, but the principles are still there. So I do think they need to engage in some kind of image improvement. I think for probably the next 5 years, they've kind of lost that, particularly with our generation. I think many people's memories will kind of live beyond the manifesto pledge or live beyond the kind of PR campaign. And I think when people will think of the Conservative Party over the next 5 to 10 years, they will think of Boris, they will think of the lies, they will think of the corruption. I think whoever becomes the new leader in Sunak or Truss, I think the best chance they stand in 2024 is making sure that the next 2 years they can slowly turn the tide on things like the economy, and they can slowly turn the tide on debates to do with immigration. Because I think when they do that, they can slowly pull back a bit of that centre ground and they can slowly pull back those kind of swing voters. But it won't be an easy task. But I don't suspect that there is much that can be done to really save the image of the party come by the next election.
What would you say are the top points which the next leader has to absolutely nail to win over the electorate? Whether that's for Keir Starmer either.
Yeah. I think there's an element of restoring trust and an element of culture within politics. I think if you look at Tony Blair in 1997, that whole Cool Britannia and really capitalizing on kind of the people that aren't interested in politics, if you can really capitalize on their desires and kind of tune in on something that's familiar to them, I think you can really well position yourself. Not only can you hopefully land a big election victory, but you can also try and you can also try more politics. Then you can try a bit more of a diverse range of policies, because you've kind of got that bit more trust in the public. You don't necessarily get witch hunted for everything you do. So I think that would be one. I think we need to start the NHS. I think the NHS is in total disarray. I think the problems go way beyond the waiting list times and way beyond kind of A&E capacity. I think there's problems in the management. I think there's problems in the organisational sense of it. So it does need some form of a system change. So whoever's bold enough to come up with a comprehensive plan of that, I think will be in a better position for doing so. And I do think there's opportunity to be made on Brexit. I think people need to look at the situation we're in, for better or for worse, and we need to capitalise on the economic opportunities of it. Nobody wants to see these queues in Kent or Dover, and whether or not that is a fault of Brexit or not, all of these things that can be related to Brexit, or all of these things that seem like they're an issue because of Brexit, this is the opportunity now to really make right of those wrongs. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, Brexit and the NHS, they're going to be top of the agenda for the next 10 years, I think. Speaking of the agenda, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, what's your opinion? I don't know if you watched the debate on TV the other day.
Yeah.
Who's more likely to come out on top?
It is such a difficult one. It's a really, really difficult one. I think, as I said earlier about 2024 and that election being really quite pivotal on who we choose or who they choose to elect now, I think it really kind of boils down to who can be trusted most with kind of the arms of politics at the moment. I think if it's a game of delivery, and I think if it's a game of kind of being able to express and communicate yourself better, I think Sunak edges that slightly.
Yeah.
I think if it's a game of, it's not even a game of looking to get away from Boris's image, because I think Liz Truss is probably the most in tune with that. And I think this is just how difficult it is for voters at the moment. I think that typically in a leadership contest, there's always one that you think he might pip it. And I know a lot of people thought that about Rishi, but the polls recently are really not going in his favour. I don't think it's a great time to be a Conservative supporter at all. I think it's quite horrible watching the blue on blue attacks, and I can't see that how that is doing the party image any favor whatsoever. But in terms of the two candidates, you can say they're well qualified. You can say that they've both got good experience in government. But who I would choose if I had to put a name on it, maybe Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
Just.
But do you think the fact it's taken them so long to resign and for this to implode, people will just be saying, why the fuck didn't you leave a year ago? Why has it taken all of this now for you to finally resign? Do you think that could be damaging to Rishi?
Yeah, it's been a question that's been asked on a few of the debates, and obviously Liz Truss never handed in her resignation. She was adamant that she was happy to stay. I get that as foreign secretary when the situation in Ukraine is going on. I get how you choose to honour your position, but do I believe her decision was based off of that? I don't think that's so clear. I think for Rishi, there was ample opportunity. I think when Partygate first broke, I think I wouldn't have been surprised if he went then. I wouldn't have been surprised when the Sue Gray report came out and when it was proven true that Boris lied to Parliament. So you're really looking at these kind of times, as you said, and you're going, why not then? Why now? Yeah. Is it a game of you think tactically it's better now? I'm not sure what inspires the decision, but the Chris Pincher scandal was without a doubt Boris's downfall. I think that as Boris is, like I say, quite formidable and he's quite clever in his ways, I think he could always just about teeter. And every time it looked like he was about to fall off, he could somehow kind of pull himself back up. But as soon as that scandal broke, no less than a week later than the other scandal before that,
it goes with Rishi. I think it goes back to a point which we spoke about at the beginning with Boris being presidential. I think Rishi is he's lined himself up in the last year to emulate like that exact type of image. Look what he did with the Eat Out to Help Out. His name was plastered. It wasn't Conservatives. It was Rishi Sunak plastered everywhere on social media. Like, I think he's definitely trying to pick up on that trend of that presidential image.
Even if you kind of look at the leaders' debates now, it's funny because Rishi is almost talking like he is already the leader. And I'm sure that is a game of PR, and I'm sure that is a game of strategy. And whether or not it will pay off, it'll be interesting. But he's also been hounded in the past week for sounding like that private schoolboy and kind of mansplaining things to Liz Truss. So there's an element, like you say, that it almost felt like Rishi was the one to succumb it. But actually, in the past couple of weeks, that kind of has come to haunt him, really.
What do you think about that whole of the media, everyone just hounding Rishi for having this background where he went to private school, he's now married to a daughter of a billionaire, he's super rich? Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's just? And do you think it's important?
Really difficult one. There's no denying that Rishi Sunak has an unbelievable amount of wealth. Whether or not that's something that he should be hounded for, I don't think I necessarily agree with. I think if you've made your money honestly, and I think if you declare it, and it's, as it is in Rishi Sunak's case, it's a British success story. I don't think there's any reason why that is something that should bring you down. I think when you look at Rishi's kind of persona as a product of the wealth, that's a whole different question. Again, when watching his leaders' debates, he was very quick to kind of comment on the interest of mortgage owners, but you're also missing out on the far majority of people that don't have a mortgage. So I think his true character kind of comes out more so when he's trying to honor the Conservative image and when he's trying to double down on his kind of economics, and less so what he's got behind him. But it's certainly something that shouldn't be secret information, but I don't think it's something that needs to be kind of branded all over the front pages.
Yeah, it's always an interesting one. Politicians come in with a background of money. Yeah, I think it's part of the reason why people like Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders, I know they never won in an election, but they gained so much popularity despite being considered basically socialist. I think people could perhaps relate to them a little bit more. I know they're wealthy people, but they're not like multimillionaires, right? Well, maybe, I'm not sure with Bernie Sanders, actually.
It's funny, and it's in the last half an hour. It's the way we spoke about politics suggests that there are so many layers and there are so many facets to it. But really, you can just boil it down to the basics of working class versus middle classes. And I think that there are a lot of people whose politics are more in tune with the simplicity of, I'm a working class person, I'm going to vote for working class values. I see how politics affects the community firsthand. So therefore I need to do my bit at the ballot box and entertain that. And again, there's no denying that in the last, since Corbyn on Labour's front, but I'm trying to think if ever in the Conservative front, but there's no denying that there is such a neglection of working class values. And I think it makes great opportunity for a working class leader. I think that if Andy Burnham was to ever become Labour leader, I think he would do a fantastic job at rallying up that kind of ideology and rallying up the North. And that is a huge part of the electorate that's been neglected for as long as I've kind of ever been interested in politics, you know?
Yeah, I guess that's probably the seed of what sparked this whole diversity and inclusion conversation as well. Because if the Tory parties are so dominated by such wealthy people, not that it's necessarily wrong with having wealthy people in your party, but it creates that detachment between the upper classes and the lower classes. They don't feel like they can relate. And I think to an extent it's true as well. I think if you're an MP and you've been born into wealth, I'm not sure you can really sympathize with people in different classes and really understand their agendas and their needs. And are those agendas and needs going to be at the top of your priority when you make it into office? So I think when it comes to diversity, that's the yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's a confliction of interest that we were kind of speaking about earlier, because I think you do have these MPs that, you know, will go to the surgeries every Sunday and they will listen to their constituents. And these can be, you know, things that such as town infrastructure or things like, you know, you can't afford the bus or you can't afford your heating and stuff. And I don't doubt that there is a good batch of MPs out there that will sit and listen, but they're not the ones that get to the cabinet. As you say, you need to readjust your priorities when you're a cabinet secretary, and you have to understand that you're working for the government. So I think in order to get those values heard right at the top is almost an impossible task.
Yeah, it's a difficult balancing act. Let's turn our attention to Labour a bit. These guys have been absolutely butchered for the last couple of years. Jeremy Corbyn, probably as divisive as Boris Johnson in some ways, extremely Marmite. How does someone like Keir Starmer go about leading a Labour charge in the next election?
Really difficult. I think whoever knows the answer, Keir Starmer needs to get in contact with as soon as possible, because I think he's still trying to find that out himself. I always felt it was, if, you know, how kind of value-ridden politics seems now in light of Partygate and in light of Boris, it almost now would be the perfect time for a Corbyn to burst onto the scene and to kind of seize that momentum. And it almost feels like Keir Starmer would have been better positioned, you know, in 2019, when the election was more centred around policy and around Brexit and things like that. So I think Labour have just kind of got it muddled up the wrong way round. Keir Starmer has such a tough task. He has to appeal to the you know, as we said, the kind of Labour heartlands and the working class northern people. He also has a responsibility to now appeal to people that support strikes and the trade unions and things like that. And he also has a responsibility to, you know, be a voice of the values of younger people. So people that, I know the gender debate is quite frequent to come around. As somebody that has to represent all of these kind of leftist issues, he needs to be comfortable in doing all of those things. It's not an easy task. I don't think there's a particular politician or a particular person I can point the finger at. I think what Labour need is somebody that can just do the best. Whether or not I think Keir Starmer can do the best, I'm not so sure. But it's going to be a really, really interesting campaign for Labour come 2024.
What policies, what areas do you think Labour could absolutely nail the Tories on?
I think they could nail them on, let me think. I think they can nail them on the NHS. I think, of course, Labour are quite quick to flush the numbers with well, at least in, you know, 2019, it was the Magic Money Tree Manifesto. But there's no doubt that they will pledge to putting a real big investment into the NHS. So I think if they can sort out social care in that sense, and I think if people can just begin to feel a difference. I think if they can bring those NHS waiting times down to the targets like they've done under Tony Blair, people will be really impressed. I think it's just people want to see an improvement in everyday life. And I don't know, I don't think there's a particular policy or a particular area of policy that achieves that. I think it's just improvements everywhere. And I think it will be about bringing down the price of energy where possible. I think it will be raising wages, particularly that of NHS and public workers where possible, achieving the targets in the NHS, making sure Brexit is in a better position. And like I say, really just stripping bare all of these kind of toxic arguments that have made politics so divisive over the past 10 years.
Yeah. Do you think Starmer has the personality to rein all this in and win an election?
I don't know. I don't think he particularly has the personality to do it. I don't even really know if he has the cabinet to do it. I'm sure you'll get a lot of Labour supporters who would be telling me I'm wrong for both of those things. But in my opinion, I could probably feed into what the majority of people think about Keir Starmer and think, who or what does he stand for or what's his thing? Because that's the reality of it. I think, as I said earlier, it is now the responsibility of everybody on the left, every Labour supporter, whether or not you're a Corbynite or you're a Blairite. I think it's the responsibility of all of those kind of Lib Dem voters that are, pretty just be tactical with it. I think if you're centre ground, I think if you're a swing voter, I think if you're on the left, be tactical with it, rally behind him, because if your priority is getting the Conservatives out, that's the best chance you've got. And I don't think what's to follow will be necessarily how did Labour perform. I think it will just be, thank God the Conservatives are out for them,
Yeah. I know we mentioned this earlier, but do you think any third party can make a dent in the next election?
I don't think so. I think I predict the Green Party to maybe overtake the Liberal Democrats in terms of how many votes that they get. I don't know if they'll get any more seats, but it certainly feels more common, I'd say, to me and you, Sam, that, when people who don't really care about politics or people who don't really care who they vote for, they're quite quick to vote the Green Party. Yeah. So I can kind of see them taking over a space as maybe the third biggest party, but I don't think there'll be anything near a coalition kind of occurring come 2024.
Yeah, let's get Greta into the House of Commons. Let's move in a bit of a different direction away from domestic politics. Obviously, there's a whole stuff going on in Ukraine. What do you think the UK's involvement should be? Because right now we're fighting this proxy war. We're providing tanks, we're providing guns. I saw this week we trained up Ukrainian troops here in Britain and then flew them back to Ukraine. What do you think our involvement should be?
I think we should always have a big stance on it. I think we should always take good pride in defending freedom. And I think when war is taking place on European soil, that really changes the debate than if it was to be in the Middle East and it was to be a war that necessarily didn't affect, someone that we have real close, strong economic ties with and is seen as, as an ally to us. So I think the Ukraine situation is really difficult. We're in no period to be pouring out aid or pouring out money into kind of defense, security, war, as you say, kind of training up Ukrainian citizens. And I don't necessarily think it does any favors in the electorate doing that. But I do think in times like this, you do need to rally up as much support as possible, both financially and kind of legislatively, by blocking Russia out of our kind of economics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's much kind of room to say that I think we should kind of tone it down. But I would say that it's something that, you need to monitor these things kind of daily. This is not something where you should be going, we'll do it for 2 or 3 years and then we'll just end it. I think we need to do whatever we can for Ukraine, just to put up a front to Putin to let him know that, we do not stand for this kind of stuff on Russian soil, European soil.
Yeah. Okay, as well, 3 options. We got Starmer, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss. Which leader do you think is best suited to give Putin which one's going to be most respected is what I'm trying to say.
None of them. None of them. There was the rumor, wasn't there, that when the Russian invasion first happened, Liz Truss invited the Russian ambassador to the Foreign Office. And the rumor was that she apparently shouted so hard down his neck, he walked out after 15 seconds. Now, I don't know, as I say, if you've watched any more of Liz Truss on video, but I do find that harder and harder to believe every time I kind of see her on the TV. So I don't know whether or not necessarily Liz Truss, for what she's worth in her knowledge of foreign relations and international development and things like that, don't know if she's quite the aggression that could be required for those kind of situations. I think Keir Starmer, again, I think he kind of falls susceptible to that lack of personality and that lack of kind of grunt almost. So that would leave Rishi Sunak, but then there's no way I would ever say a 5'2" man that was privately educated should be anywhere near a kind of, anywhere near those kind of conversations, because surely he's just going to get laughed out the room. I'm not sure.
Oh God, save us. If push comes to shove, and Britain was in a position where we had to engage in direct combat with Russia, do you think that we should push through, or do you think it's an avoid conflict at all costs with Russia?
I think it will depend where it's taking place. I would never want to fight on Ukrainian soil. I could never think of, apart from the inevitable kind of nuclear warfare, I can't see there'd ever be a reason we'd need to go anywhere near Russian soil. So that leaves the argument if it took place on UK soil. But again, I don't think there's too much to worry about in that sense. I think we have to be really, really careful with these issues. And I think when this kind of stuff is taking place, it's very easy to kind of lash around conclusions without really knowing the kind of technical detail of it. And I don't doubt that the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office and things like that are doing an incredible amount of effort and putting in intricate detail into there to respond to this kind of stuff. So I'm not too sure how easy that is to kind of say what I think we should do. But I think all of the time that this is not taking place on our front door, we just need to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Let's hope it comes to an end soon. Like we've got so much to deal with. We've got the biggest debt ever in our history to try and tackle. Trying to clear the backlog with the pandemic, because of Brexit. The last thing we need is like a war, just increasing our debt to an excruciating amount.
I don't doubt that Russia will continue carrying out these kind of micro wars, and I think that we can expect, very sadly, but I think we can expect Ukraine to really keep undergoing these attacks, maybe not on quite the scale of blowing up shopping centres, but I think they can certainly expect to be on kind of high alert for the next kind of 10, 15 years. So there's certainly a conversation to be had to say, can we let that happen? As you say, do we just sit by and kind of watch this take place for the next 10 to 15 years? Or do we understand our position and understand kind of the complexity of the situation and perhaps take a more kind of reserved perspective on it? So
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. I mean, Putin, he just completely isolated himself. He spent the last 10 years, especially with Germany, post-Soviet Union, trying to reintegrate Russia onto the global stage. I mean, they've embedded themselves into Europe. Just look how screwed we are with oil and gas right now. But now, with Ukraine, just severed all ties. And I can't see ever how he's going to rebuild those ties.
I think if we look at Russia in the future, that'll be another one to see. That'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. I think it will take something of a kind of ousting of Putin, and then to start a kind of new regime of sorts over there. Because as you say, I think Putin now has absolutely severed any ties he's got, and I think Russia are going to be challenged with an economic rebuild. And I think Russian infrastructure, there will be a time in the next kind of 30, 40 years where a lot of that communist infrastructure will need rebuilding and will need improving. So I have no doubt that if there is a new regime, they will be turning to kind of the West, looking for with their tail between their legs, asking for support on that. But again, I don't think it's something that we can so simply consider. So it will be really, really interesting to see how the state of Russia looks in kind of each decade that follows.
Yeah, I'm optimistic because if you look back in history, there's never been a dictatorship that's stood the test of time, that has had significant longevity. And when you took such an enormous risk like Putin has now, when this was over, God knows how many years' time, because there is uprising in Russia as well. Like it's not all roses there. Not everyone supports Putin, despite what the media makes out. They have such insane propaganda. I mean, look, when the Ukraine war broke out, look how many people they arrested. It was insane. So I just think with these dictatorships, with these like exclusive institutions, which these dictators are set up in history, they've just always ended up collapsing. So
I think there's an inherent part of Russia that will always kind of play into that Soviet ideology. And I think that there is a fear in Russia of the West. And I think when you see, businesses pull out of Russia, or when you see celebrities kind of, put things on Instagram and all this kind of trivial stuff, I think that appeases a good majority of the younger generation. But I think that is still enough to kind of, polarize the other half of it and see that as a threat, and actually see them as kind of people that are taking over their priorities in kind of, the Eastern ideology and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's watch what happens. Look, Tom, I'm conscious of your time. We've been going for over half an hour already. Very interesting conversation today. As I said, we covered most stuff. We'll probably talk about the pub anyway, bar one or two things.
Yeah,
As a final question to wrap up, what is your prediction for the next election?
My prediction for the next election, I think it'll be a really, really interesting election. I think a lot can happen between then and now. I think the next 2 years will be a case of performance for the new Conservative leader. I think when we enter 2024, it'd be really interesting to see how both campaigns play out. Now, I think if Labour can seize a good momentum on a campaign, I think if they can really nail on some good policy objectives, and I think if they can stay clear of mistakes and trouble and repeats of Diane Abbott and things like this, then there is no reason that come election days they should see a real big success. But again, I think if the Conservatives can kind of slowly begin to pull back on what they've lost over the next year, over the past year or so, there's no reason to say that it won't be the whitewash that many predict.
Let's see. Listen, Tom, thanks for coming on today. Love having these conversations. We've had them a lot in the last 3-4 years. I'm sure I'll have you on again at another time.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. See you down the pub.